My name's Marcus Vaughan. I'm the co-founder and chief growth officer of Catalyst Technologies. Welcome to today's masterclass on protecting people through hurricane season with high fidelity flood mapping. As I mentioned, my name's Marcus Vaughan. I'm a co-founder and chief growth officer of Catalyst Technologies, and it's my absolute pleasure to be your host today. And joined with me, I have Juliet Murphy, the CEO and co-founder of FloodMap. Morning, Juliet.
Hi, Marcus. How are you doing this morning?
Very well, very well. I will do a quick intro, Juliet, so people have a little context about your background. So Juliet's a professional water resources engineer turned entrepreneur, inspired by social good and solving big impact problems. After experiencing the devastation of the Queensland 2011 floods and the Calgary 2013 flood, she's motivated to improve flood emergency response. Juliet co-founded FloodMap, the aim to improve safety and prevent damage. And FloodMap is an AI-powered rapid flood model purpose-built for emergency management. Prior to FloodMap, Juliet worked as an engineering consultant and water resources engineer for over a decade, specializing in surface water management, hydrology, and flood modeling. So we are in the presence of flood greatness. Juliet, thank you very much for your time today.
No worries. I feel like I'm here with greatness, just been in the Illumina webinar. So yeah,
Excellent.
Thanks for having me.
Well, hey guys, we'll just do a quick run through of what we've got on today. As we mentioned at the very beginning, today's session, we are really looking at hurricane preparedness, and we're going to take a deep dive into flood risk exposure and look at some of the major considerations that we need to always keep in mind for both Australia and obviously the US. We are going to be looking and taking a real close look at the FloodMap technology that's been developed by Juliet and the team at FloodMap, which is very much focused on getting that absolute fidelity levels up on flood risk exposure. Really exciting stuff. And so we'll be taking a look at what standard alerts look like versus FloodMap intelligence. And then we're going to be jumping into Illumina to have a quick look at preparedness for hurricane season and flood as well in terms of getting alerts and getting that common operating picture going. So, with all of our masterclasses, we're obviously always looking to deliver some thought leadership and drive innovation, but also provide an opportunity to jump into product and show some of those hacks that can get organizations and that muscle memory up as we prepare for the next round of events. As with all of our masterclasses, we do like to keep some time aside for Q&A. So we have kept some time aside at the end. Please do take time to drop questions into the Q&A panel. There is, if you wave the mouse around, if you can't see it, there is a Q&A panel typically at the bottom of the screen. Drop your questions in, guys. We will get to as many as we can possibly get to. And anything we can't, we'll look to come back to you offline if we run out of time today. Probably the final thing to say as we get started, very, very exciting day for Illumina and FloodMap. We can now officially announce that we are working together in partnership and by providing FloodMap within the Illumina threat dashboard to integrate with our platform. So we're absolutely excited to be working together and really push the boundaries on emergency response and preparedness. So, hey, I think that's a win for everyone, Juliet.
Absolutely. Really exciting for FloodMap to be partnering with Catalyst and feeding our data into the Illumina platform. I think it's going to deliver value to a lot of people.
Without further ado, we should probably get started. So hurricane season, we'll start there. Obviously, as we clicked over 1 June, hurricane season became official in the US again. And I think walking into 2021, we're very much looking at an interesting season. And I think everyone's probably approaching this with a lot of caution this year, just given the fact that 2020 was absolutely devastating. We had 30 named storms roll through and cause something $60 billion worth of damage last year, as well as obviously the added complexity of dealing with a global pandemic, which obviously rolled around the world. So huge amount of complexity, really devastating situations. We saw multiple hurricanes tear over the same regions a range of times, which really made challenging conditions in terms of not only instant response, but ongoing recovery. Obviously, the response agencies were quite stretched there for a period of time and working through a totally new operating rhythm and trying to access people on the ground in some really challenging health circumstances, as, hey, we'd never done this before in a global pandemic. So walking into 2021, I think everyone's probably a little bit cautious about what this looks like. And it doesn't sound like the predictions are noting that it's going to be an easy season either, Juliet.
Yeah, unfortunately, NOAA with their recent predictions is forecasting 60% chance of above average season. I think 30% chance of an average season and only 10% chance that the season's going to be below average. So it's just indicative of what we might be seeing this season and what's to come. So there's a forecast prediction of 13 to 20 named storms. And whilst it's a little bit less than last season, it's still really quite an active season that we're expecting, and that could bring significant flooding as well as wind damage, storm surge that's likely to hit some of the eastern states in the US.
Yeah, indeed. I know that our audience today is obviously split across both sides of the Pacific as well. I mean, we've just walked through a pretty interesting La Nina season in Australia, which is typically our wet season, with some pretty interesting damage right down the eastern seaboard. And hey, a few weeks ago, you probably would have been asking, why would you do a flood focused webinar? And then obviously Victoria pretty much became submerged in floodwater. Really timely reminder that we experience storm season and flood exposure all year round on this side of the Pacific as well, with thousands still recovering through the Victorian flood as we speak. We know that towns were cut from electricity, thousands of people still without power, some small towns without drinkable water. So really interesting situation, regardless of whether it's whether you're in the Atlantic or exposed to the Atlantic hurricane season or not. I think with that point, it's probably worth us having a look. Hurricane is obviously one thing, but I guess the compounding effects that come with hurricane, flood's obviously a major part of that, Juliet.
Yeah, absolutely. Flooding is the most common natural hazard in the US and certainly in Australia as well. So we're finding that flooding is becoming more frequent and more severe. In the US, according to FEMA, about 99% of counties have experienced flooding in the last 20 years, which is pretty significant. I mean, we're really at a stage we're expecting it now, and that this is growing at an alarming rate. So there's the intersection. Not only are we seeing warming oceans with a changing climate produce more intense, more frequent, and more severe storms that are bringing larger rainfall intensities than we've seen before, but we're also seeing an increase in population and a growth in development and infrastructure in these exposed areas. And I think the compounding effect of those two trends is really meaning that damages are climbing at an alarming rate. So flooding impacts 18 million people worldwide on a global scale each year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it causes a lot of fatalities. Most of these, by people driving through flooded roads, which is really upsetting. The US Congress, budgets about $54 billion in annual damages for hurricane and flood loss. But the World Bank, predicts that around 35% of this is preventable with the right warning systems and action plans. So I think, whilst it's quite confronting, these statistics, there is a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it is to a certain extent a manageable disaster exposure there. I mean, it's interesting that a flood, obviously, with inundation causes immediate asset damage, but there's a lot that comes with that in terms of power outages, failure of supply chain. We're still running through a global pandemic, so the added complexity of all the health situations that surround that, especially when you have to then rehouse people. I know with obviously a work from home arrangement still in place across most of the states and much of Australia as well, you automatically run into some really interesting business continuity challenges where you might have a dispersed workforce being impacted running critical functions. So again, there's I guess a broader consideration on top of the immediate inundation risk exposure as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's an extra layer of disruption, this season and last season that we haven't sort of had to manage previously.
So Flood map is obviously focused on really trying to improve the management of flood risk exposure for organizations. So Julia, perhaps talk us through the big challenges you're trying to tackle and what this has looked like over the journey of developing flood map and the progress you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. So at FloodMap, our the challenge we've been solving is all about delivering flood data in real time, which historically has been a really big challenge. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about the reasons as to why that is, and give a bit of background. So what we hear from many organizations at local and state governments as well as asset owners is that existing flood warning products are very broad. Sometimes these are provided at the state level. And as we can see in these examples here, storm surge warnings might be specified in a storm surge height. So there's an example here from Laura where the height is sort of anywhere from 5 to 20 feet. And also riverine flood warning products often provided as a hydrograph there with a predicted riverine height. But the thing about these warnings is it really relies on the recipient having knowledge of their coastal or catchment area and their nearest coastal or riverine gauge. They need to know the gauge elevation and the datum, as well as their asset floor height, to be able to convert that warning into anything targeted and useful and specific to them, such that they can take targeted action to prevent damage to assets. But with these warnings, that's really not happening now. And so this is why we really see that people just simply don't understand that their assets or staff are at risk to take targeted action. Or we see the sort of opposite effect where, it's the boy who cried wolf effect, that because they're so broad, we might see a lot of, small businesses or people not doing anything because they get these types of warnings all the time. And last time it happened, they were fine. And so it's this sort of learned, complacency, I guess.
Mm. And the I guess with that, hey, we've experienced that before ourselves, Julia. Obviously, going through the 2011 floods here in Brisbane, Queensland, where certainly I think there was a lot of expectation around what it was going to look like compared to 1974 floods. So there's an expectation that what we've seen before will be again, which might not necessarily always be the case.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that sort of leads into, the next thing I wanted to talk through, which is that, flood forecasting is incredibly complex and, there's various ways around this, but it is a big challenge. So firstly, in order to produce, a location specific flood forecast, you need to go through the process of meteorology forecasting, which government agencies and global climate models have some really great solutions for this. So predicting where the rain is going to fall. Step number 2 is hydrology forecasting. So translating that rainfall across the catchment into how much of that is going to drain down into the rivers to predict how high the rivers will peak, or storm surge forecasting to simulate, how that, wind effect of the hurricane is going to result in storm surge height. And the third step, which is the most challenging, hydraulic flood forecasting. So a 2D hydraulic flood model would need to be run in order to then take those boundary conditions of river height or storm surge height and show how the water is going to move across the topography and what specific areas will be impacted. And now to run a model like that, usually you'd use something like a hydrodynamic model like Schism or HECRAS. But the problem with these models is that their runtimes are, prohibit them from being used in real time because they might take 48 hours plus to run for a large area. And by then, the flood has happened. So, this just gives some context and reasoning as to why a lot of the warning products are so broad, because that third step just isn't possible with traditional tools.
Yeah.
So that's a bit more of why we've built what we've built.
And I think, we obviously see a lot of that with the warnings that we currently get at the moment. So, if we look at Illumina right now, you can see that Tasmania in Australia, half the state is literally under a flood warning watch at the moment. Much of the area is obviously still in Victoria, sitting in a flood warning. So very broad, I guess, warnings coming through.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so if we look at the next slide, there's another alternative that you sort of touched on as well, where sometimes different emergency managers or asset owners will turn to static flood maps as an alternative during an emergency. So referring to either a historical event that's happened or a 1 in 100 type scenario. So even for example, like the FEMA flood maps, the problem with these is that they're often limited in their extent that the study was undertaken. And they're also static. So they're reflecting just one scenario. They're not reflecting the current, the current hurricane that's approaching land with the rainfall predictions and storm surge predictions that we're going to see. So they're not updating in real time and really not reflecting the current events. The tough thing about rainfall events, when they happen, the rain doesn't come along and say, okay, I'm going to rain exactly like a 1 in 100 rainfall intensity, because that's the maps that the emergency managers have. If that was the case, our job would be a lot easier. But it just sort of feeds into the problem. And again, is it a good segue into talking a little bit more about real-time flood intelligence?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so what we focus on, Marcus, at FloodMap is real-time flood intel. We use a system, FloodMap Dash, that's purpose-built for emergency management to essentially model the flood in real time. So this means our system is always gathering intelligence from sensors such as river sensors, coastal sensors, rainfall sensors, and updating every hour as that data comes in to simulate the flood and the conditions that we're seeing on the ground. So the system's powered by AI, as well as using detailed hydrology and hydraulics modeling. And we're able to run models at 100,000 times faster than those industry standards, which means that for something like emergency management and real-time intelligence, it's very well suited. So this level of flood data gives an unrivaled situational awareness at a large scale. So it's hyper high fidelity, high resolution data at a hyper high scale, which enables users to have a better understanding of which specific assets and people might be impacted by the flood.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, to break that down, very much using the context of the current situation of the rain event or the flooding events, ensuing from that, and then getting, I guess, hyper targeted on what's actually happening, as opposed to the warning being across a state.
That's exactly right.
So talk us through, what are we looking at here?
So this is FloodMap Nowcast. So this is what we've collaborated to deliver through the Illumina platform, which is a real-time flood map live feed. So that means that the map will update, as you can see here. This is sped up slightly, but every hour you would get a refresh of the live flood conditions within the mapping platform to maintain situational awareness and take targeted actions, whether that might be diverting staff and team members around flooded roads or taking actions to protect assets. So the map here, you can see the pink area is FloodMap Nowcast, and the red and black dots, there are assets where they're turning red when you can detect that those assets are under threat. So it visualizes the ability to get that really targeted flood intelligence of what is the actual impact to your operations or your business continuity.
Gotcha. The whole point being, obviously, we've got finite resources in an emergency, so get hyper targeted with the use of those resources to resolve and move forward.
That's exactly right.
Oh, pardon me, we're going a little bit faster than I was expecting. Okay, let's have a look at some case studies. I know you guys have done a huge amount of modeling over in the States.
Yeah, so we thought we'd just have a little bit of a look at Hurricane Laura as a case study to sort of demonstrate flood map intelligence compared to some other products that different emergency managers or asset owners might be using. So what we're seeing here is the storm surge forecast warnings from NOAA and some of the products showing where that inundation might occur and to what height. So you see the one on the left gives us an idea at the state level scale across Texas and Louisiana there that the storm surge might be ranging anywhere from 2 up to 20 feet, with the most impacted area being around Lake Charles. But it doesn't allow you to really zoom in and see, you know, which specific streets or which specific assets. It's quite high level there. And same for the coastal inundation dashboard on the right here. So really useful in giving us a broad understanding of the areas that are going to be hit, but sort of limits the zoom that we're able to get on, you know, specific assets across an organization. And same for the river warnings that were issued. So this is a significant river flood outlook issued by NOAA. So it's showing us what might be likely and possible, showing there that the Louisiana is going to be significantly impacted by flooding, but that's a pretty broad area that we're looking at, sort of moving up across 2 states there, as well as some potential flooding over there in I think that's Virginia, if I'm seeing correctly. And this is just tricky to gain insights on which staff or assets might be impacted during that event. So we're going to compare this with some of the warnings that the intelligence that we were able to deliver during that event. So this particular screenshot is showing Nowcast in Illumina. So this is showing the flooding along the Texas-Louisiana border to a detailed street level, where we're really able to understand to, you know, the granularity of specific blocks or specific buildings, what is going to be impacted and even to what depth that's going to be impacted. So that's really able to provide a next level of detail to asset owners or emergency managers on where to direct their resources to be able to ensure business continuity, ensure their staff are safe, ensure their assets are protected. So this is just showing there in comparison to that broad storm surge warning 2 slides back, the flood inundation at Lake Charles there that was badly impacted.
Gotcha. I mean, I just think about the amount of information that flies around during a flood event. And, you know, when you're trying to actually coordinate and get that situational awareness on what's actually happening, you're dealing with a whole host of information, some well-reported, some not well-reported, massive blind spots and information in terms of what's actually underwater, what's not. You probably make, well, I mean, you know, again, from experiencing, you are making a lot of phone calls. This is essentially giving you that opportunity to have it pretty much on your laptop to see what's actually affected and what's not.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Okay.
So yeah, one of the questions we get asked a lot is how accurate is our mapping? And so this is showing a flood map dash model powering Nowcast there in the light blue. And in the dark blue, we've got the observed flooding via satellite imagery after that event. The difference is that our intelligence was provided in real time as opposed to sat imagery, which sometimes you're waiting a couple of days after the event to gain intel on. And so typically we are finding our models are able to predict 90 to 96% accuracy of the flood impacted areas. And this just goes to provide an example of that.
Awesome. All right. And that looks like Hurricane Harvey.
That's it. Yeah. So this is a flood extent and depth layer for Hurricane Harvey, which hit the Houston and Galveston Bay area in 2017, and how that can be used in the Illumina platform to identify some specific threats to different locations. So it might be a good point for me to hand over to you and talk more about the useful ways in which organizations can use that for their response to that event.
Yeah, indeed. No, I think to that point, I mean, our whole objective here, guys, is obviously to provide as much situational awareness and really speed up and provide better accuracy in the information that you have at your fingertips during major events like flood. Obviously, that's one of the designs for the integration that we're currently going through for Flood Map Nowcast into Illumina. It is an opportunity for me to have a super quick run through of how we are using Illumina, or how a lot of our clients are using Illumina to not only get that forewarning and situational awareness, but also start to building the common operating picture that you need to run from or need to work from as a team when you are working through a major event like a flood. Now, I just want to do a quick visual. I started with a mute, so I might do a quick visual. Juliet, can you see Illumina on screen? I'll just get a quick shout from her. It looks like good, which is fantastic. So we'll do a quick run through in terms of getting that alert and moving that through to building that common operating picture. And before I jump into that, if you have Illumina, and a lot of you do, I can see we've had a lot of new people come into today's session, which is fantastic. If you don't have Illumina, we will drop a link in. You can get started for free. Illumina has a free base model that you can get started on. So literally go to illumina.io or catalysttech.co and click get started for free. You're going to see a little slider that's going to help you get into platform in minutes, literally in minutes. Once you're in platform, so you are going to see a whole host of alert data come up. If you are really interested in getting high fidelity flood mapping, essentially just hit the threats. It is under the threat category there, so you can essentially click that. That's going to send us a note that we need to have a chat to you about what you need to map specifically. There's a lot of computational power that happens in the background, so we'll want to understand exactly what areas you want to map from a high fidelity perspective. Of course, to look at situational awareness and how we move from getting that initial alert and setting up alerts through building that common operating picture. There's no flood warnings that I can see in the US at the moment, so I might zoom back to Australia really quickly. Obviously, most people in Australia would know we've had a really nasty situation in Victoria. As I mentioned before, it looks like Tasmania has also got a lot of flood warnings coming through. To set up alerts so that you do have that forewarning, really quick run through here. Setting up an alert is really easy. You essentially go to libraries, hit alerts. You want a new alert. Let's choose flood in this particular instance. We'll select next. We'll tick high and severe, and we can configure what that looks like for you. But essentially, we're going to triangulate the severity of the data coming through to the distance to pin, which is your location that you have. This is just we want to select which site. I'll choose Miami for this particular alert because we do have a site there on the map. And this is just a quick run through of what that alert will look like when it pops up on your phone. But of course, you can type anything into this and you can set it up to go to multiple people. It could be access your flood response plan. And we'll choose the team. I'll set this one up for our incident management team. And that will go out via email and SMS. So that team now has an alert set up so that when a flood threat hits high or severe for the Miami office, the recipients and their local IMT are going to get an SMS email come through. So that essentially can get them started, get that forewarning of information coming through. When they get that alert, they can jump into Illumina, take a look at the situation at hand and what sites that might be affecting. We can see here there's still an active flood alert against the Melbourne office. To start building that common operating picture, so everyone is operating with the same set of facts, we typically create an event room, which is going to pull that data through. And again, get the team started. One of the first things we would always say when you create an event room is either undertake an assessment or activate your team to undertake an assessment. It's always a good place to start. And again, you can do that really quickly. We'll just choose our flood activation response. That's going to ask, it's going to say that a flood warning has been issued. Can you confirm you're available to activate as part of our IMT? To yes, no poll. Again, I'm going to send that out to our local IMT group, so they are receiving that. Really just to aim them to come together and start actually building the facts around the situation at hand. Now, if you do have the added benefit of having Nowcast in your platform, that is going to give you the opportunity to run off a really solid set of facts coming through. And we can see here that I've got multiple people saying yes and no in terms of their availability for that IMT. As that situation continues, you can start running through obviously your action plans that you might have set up for that particular event, as well as adding information to the event board, categorizing it as fact, assumption, and assigning tasks to keep moving. As mentioned before, this is all available in Illumina. The threat map, you can get started very much for free. We'll drop the link into the chat and you'll get a follow-up email to allow you to get started. But wanted to do that super quick run through just to build that muscle memory. Probably the final thing I would add, especially for those about to walk into hurricane season, if you haven't yet, a lot of our clients are now using Illumina's micro simulations. So we've set up a whole host of micro simulations in platform, again, that are going to do a quick walkthrough of a particular incident or an aspect of an incident, just to get teams, again, back on the boil in terms of might be an incident assessment you might be testing. It might be asking them to dive into their BCP and look at particular critical dependencies they have if under a power outage or under a flood exposure. So real short 5-minute sessions just to send out across the team, keeps people sharp, keeps them frosty as we get ready for hurricane season. That's probably enough in terms of the demonstration today. I don't want to take up too much time with that. I do want to leave some time available for Q&A. If you have any questions, please do drop them into the Q&A panel. I haven't received anything yet, so I'll give everyone a minute. I've got a question for you, Juliet. Talk us through in terms of the amount of mapping that FloodMap has done. What kind of coverage does FloodMap have across, let's say, Australia and the US? Probably a great starting point.
Yeah, sure. So in Australia, we have coverage all across Queensland and New South Wales right now, with a lot of databases ready for if we need to roll that out to other areas such as Victoria or Tasmania. So we sort of, roll it out on demand. We in the US have currently 90% of the states mapped and operational. So big focus this hurricane season on a lot of those eastern states. We're actively working in Virginia, North Carolina, Texas, and some of these areas that have been harder hit when it comes to hurricane and flooding. But yeah, pretty ready to go there. So please, if there's any areas of interest, encourage people to get in touch, and we should be able to help out. Excellent.
And I've got a couple of questions starting to flow through. How quickly can you stand up FloodMap for an organization, for example, during an event? ?
Yeah, so there is a time to get set up and stand up. So I guess, encourage people to be really organized. We can usually get that done sort of within a month if people get in touch and, need Nowcast, we'll get in touch, understand which area you need, what type of data feed, and should have you up and running in a few weeks there.
Excellent. Okay. And what kind of clients are currently using FloodMap?
Yeah, so lots of government organizations, also some players in the utilities space, particularly power utilities. Then transport and logistics companies, so either asset owners in the road and rail space, or logistics companies in sort of when it's concerning their supply chain.
Excellent. Okay, there's a curly question on cost. How much does this cost?
Yeah, so it depends on coverage. Someone that's a local government or city is going to pay a different amount than a national sort of transport company. So we're able to provide a quote if you sort of get in touch with your areas of interest and the data you need. We can get you an estimate.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really going to be bespoke on a client by client basis. So that's certainly something we can assist and come back to you on. A few comments have come through, so I'm not sure these are exactly questions. They need a bridge between the warnings and what can be affected by the different river coastal water gauge readings projections. Thank you, Mark. I'm not sure if there's a question in that. Here's an interesting one from Michael, though. Being from the New Orleans area, we run into a lot of variables of the pumps working and catch basins at a street level being clear of debris and clogs. It's probably a really good point, Juliet. in terms of, I guess, managing around some of those variables. Any thoughts of, I guess, your experience in dealing with that?
Yeah, so important, I guess, when you're looking at, infrastructure where there's, big linear infrastructure that has a lot of drainage. I mean, we see the same thing in New South Wales and Australia with different railway lines. If there's infrastructure that's kind of getting clogged, it really does result in a lot more backwater impact and sort of inundation because areas aren't able to drain properly. So it's a really big challenge. I think this is impacting people everywhere. So even to be able to understand sort of in real time, where other flood impacted areas might kind of help, again, divert resources to be able to send out, engineers to specific asset inspections where you kind of identifying there might be a particular problem to sort of get those drainages clear.
Yeah. Interesting question here from Kwan Yup Fong. What data actually drives into flood map? Can we generate probability or uncertainty maps from that data?
Yeah, we actually have done this for clients before where we have sort of forecasted certain scenarios based on different inputs and river heights. But yeah, basically we taken a range of inputs from global climate forecast models, as well as point observations for rainfall, river gauges and coastal gauges. So yes, it's a possibility. And yeah, please feel free to get in touch to bounce ideas off. Happy to have a chat with you and how we can help.
Indeed. Well, we have run out of questions for this for today's session, Julia. Just a quick thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time out. Really interesting work that you and the team at Flood Map on. We're obviously extremely proud and excited about the new partnership. We really hope to drive further innovation into this area, and obviously just in time for hurricane season as well. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and look forward to having you on again for one of the next masterclasses coming up.
No worries, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Marcus. And yeah, as I said earlier, super exciting for us to be partnering with Illumina and the team. And yeah, look forward to coming on again some other time. So yeah, hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Excellent. And yes, thank you everyone for dialing in today. I really appreciate the questions and the engagement and the comments there. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, we have dropped an Illumina link into the chat function there. So if you haven't gotten onto Illumina, it is free of charge. Please feel free to use the platform. We've built it to really help improve situational awareness. If you are interested in jumping into high fidelity flood mapping, again, just go up to the threat categories there, click the button. We can coordinate a time to catch up and map out exactly what areas you need looked at, and come back to you accordingly with the team from Flood Map. So again, thank you everyone. Have a fantastic day, and we will see you all again soon.